Hi, I'm Niki Roach, host of the podcast formerly known as Let's Talk Bwlb, the podcast that will now be called Planet Possible. Planet Possible will be back for Series 3 in a few weeks, but until then, we're going to celebrate our new name with a few short audio specials. Coming soon, you can hear the views from industry professionals, young and old, expert and newcomer, on what they think is possible in the next 10 years. And we'll also look back on some of the best answers from past guests to one of my favourite questions. If you could wave your magic wand, what would you love to see happen? But first up today, I'm really happy to welcome back to the pod a guest from our very first episode and Bwlb's Director of Policy, Al Chisholm. And since this is Planet Possible, Al, I'll be pushing you for some positivity and practicality.
Awesome. I'm so excited. Is that positive enough for you?
It's a good start. So we started this back in December 2020 and here we are now, February 2022. So, oh gosh, it feels like no time and a lot of time has passed in equal measure. What are some of the highlights over that period for you, Al?
Well, there's two sides to it, aren't there? Because we've been through some massive times, which I think have informed the content of a lot of the pods. Quite a bit of pandemic stuff woven through, big global summits. COP15, COP26 happened. And I just feel that we have really crystallised an appreciation of the environment that probably wasn't there in the same way before, perhaps before pandemic. And all of those things have come together in a quite a serendipitous way to give us some really, really interesting content. Quite safe Bwlb content in things like flooding and climate and water demand. And then some possibly slightly new territory for some of our members and things like social prescribing and, you know, engaging kids with climate without scaring them too much. And then the Pride episode was great. So I think the breadth of what we've managed to cover in two little series has been fantastic.
I love moving into territories, you say, that's maybe a little less familiar for Bwlb, and some of the offshoots like the When Pride network that developed ever since, which is wonderful. I also really enjoyed the fact that we got the opportunity on the back of thinking about demand to go and meet with Minister Pow, and it feels like hopefully the pod's an opportunity to try and be a bit of a conduit for the work that our members are doing and the fields that they work in and trying to elevate that a little bit really and make some connections. I've loved as well how it feels to me, and you know, I try and shoehorn everything is connected into every conversation I have, but it's felt like things really are quite connected, and it's been wonderful to explore those a little bit as we've had those conversations. I guess the biggest moment really in that period of time for our sector and where it really connects with people's lives and what's possible for the planet was COP26. So how do you look back at that from where we are now in February 2022, just over, I guess, 100 days since COP?
I think what I found inspiring, rather than particularly all of the commitments that were made at COP, was the kind of tone of the media coverage. Really getting the media strongly on side is so pivotal to being able to, I guess, generate the scale of momentum that we need to get. So that was great. Perhaps the flip side of that was the real challenges that some of the Global South had in really accessing those talks and the discussions and having the kind of influence that they have to have on it. So that was a disappointment. We kept 1.5 alive just possibly, maybe. But, you know, you wanted positivity and we are now on Planet Possible. It is alive. But it feels a little bit like we're slightly in stasis now.
And obviously through all of this, we've been globally dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, and we've had that thread running through all of our episodes. So where do you think we are now? Are we at a point where we can start to reflect back on that? Does it still feel like we're in the middle of it all from a water and environment perspective?
I think the pandemic has definitely changed something in terms of people's appreciation, I think really for their local environment.
I get that. I mean, I understand the reticence to use the word positive. I don't think anyone thinks the pandemic has been positive. But if you're to try and take some degree of silver lining, I think it's speeded up some of the changes that we hoped, like reducing travel, for example, and also demonstrated what is possible in terms of large-scale societal change. Again, wouldn't necessarily want to go through that route, but that it is possible to reach lots of people and create a behaviour change, I think, really. I really enjoyed the conversation I had with Tripti Rai, who is the WaterAid country director in Nepal. It's been really interesting bringing an international lens into the pod, and I really hope that we carry on doing that, and we'll certainly try to do that in the coming seasons, because I just think we can all learn so much from the ways we all choose to approach these kind of water and environmental challenges. And that for me is the joy of, CIWEM having members in almost 100 countries around the world. There are countries that are experiencing climate change right now much more acutely than we are here in the UK. So how do we learn from their experiences rather than trying to work it all out for ourselves?
Yeah, and of course, the pandemic, the response to it, particularly around the development of vaccines and that kind of thing, was a global response. You can make the parallel with the kind of response that we need to the climate and nature emergencies, and we can't do that as an island, can we? We have to do that as a planet. I just think going back to possible, I think it really opened people's eyes to actually what is possible in terms of scale of response and scale of investment when you really are up against something. And given that we've got, this decade for change to keep that 1.5 alive, we've got to act blooming quickly. There is now evidence that as a planetary society, we can respond en masse.
Moving on a little bit to think about what's next for water and environment and climate over the next few months. And one of the things that's happening is the other half of COP15 happening in China later on this year. And certainly for me, we spent quite a good amount of the last 2 seasons thinking about nature, thinking about COP15, thinking about nature-based solutions. And I definitely heard from our guests, people like Craig Bennett and Becky Spate and Richard Benwell, about the really critical link between nature and things like health. So not just in terms of good mental health and the maybe obvious things, but actually, the more pressure we put on species, the more likely we are going to have things like global pandemics in the future. So those big milestones that are coming up over the next few months and what we need to be thinking about. What's top of your mind at the moment, Al?
It's unbelievable what is on the horizon from a water management perspective. Going back to talking about nature, in an environmental context, nature-based solutions is the buzz phrase. All of that is woven through so much of what's coming up in terms of water-related policy activity. There's a call for evidence on commonly littered plastics. And in the water context, wet wipes is a biggie. Within CIWEM, we talk about unflushables a huge amount. If we could really start to tackle this problem of plastic containing wet wipes being flushed down the sewer, that would be a big step forward, because it is something that certainly our sector has been grappling with for quite a while, and it's been a big problem for quite a while. More drainage, storm overflows, sewage pollution. We're going to be talking about that, I think, in a future episode, aren't we? But government's own plan for how it proposes that we get hold of the scale of sewage pollution from storm overflows. Their focus has been very much on water company activity at the moment, and that will get you so far, but it won't get us really where we need to be if we're going to achieve the public's ambition, or what looks like the public's ambition for really good, clean, healthy rivers. Still sticking on water. Again, something that's been talked about for a long, long time, and it feels like we've been trying to make the case for this for ages, but mandatory water efficiency labelling. That was announced by government last year that they're going to do it. We're now going to be consulted on in terms of the nuts and bolts of how that should actually happen. Then obviously last year, we had the Environment Act came through. That is leading to some targets that are going to be set that will be legally binding and that will be enforced by the Office for Environmental Protection. So those could be on all kinds of things, from water demand to some wastewater issues, presumably around things like storm overflows, to agriculture and abandoned metal mines. I think they've got to put in at least one target. So there's going to be some proposals consulted on there. There's a big review going on by the National Infrastructure Commission at the moment on surface water flooding, which I think is going to report later in the year, sort of maybe autumnish, I think. Surface water flooding, we saw it in London last summer, the intensity of summer rainfall just really proving problematic. And of course, that issue is linked to that whole storm overflows piece. And then we're going to see drainage and sewage management plans published for consultation. Those have been talked about for years and years. And then on a completely the opposite end of the water spectrum, we've got regional water resources planning. We're going to have draft plans later in the year. So there's a huge amount of planning, consulting on all kinds of policy that, you know, maybe individually sounds a bit techie, but collectively could all point towards quite a significant step forward in terms of how we manage water. So that should keep me busy.
I feel like you have just given us your to-do list, if I'm perfectly honest. I'm not sure that was the question that I asked, but, you know, that's what I've got.
It's my task list.
It feels like drainage and wastewater management plans, water resource planning, stuff on demand side. You know, when you think about that full water cycle, you know, in its primary school purest sense, it feels like there's loads of activity all the way through that. And what I'm interested in and really excited about, I think, is what's possible in terms of the general public's greater appreciation and value for the environment now, and whether there's an opportunity to catalyse that. We've seen some really strong advocacy around things like the health of our rivers, much as I might have, on a personal note, sometimes felt frustrated by how binary some of those arguments that I've heard are, when actually there's a lot of nuance and a lot of grey in them. Actually, the fact that the public are exercised about the health of our rivers is a wonderful thing. I think the challenge for us as professionals is how to help channel that into useful next steps, really. And as you mentioned and kind of gently trailed, we're going to talk about the health of our rivers with some very cool guests in the opening episode of season 3, which I'm really looking forward to, just getting under the skin of that in a kind of evidence-led way rather than an emotional-led way. There's a space for emotion, but I think it's also about the practicalities and what's possible and how fast, really. I guess wrapping up, really, we have got a new name, Planet Possible. What does it make you think in terms of our industry and the kind of wider impacts of the work that we're trying to do?
I really engaged with this name. I thought it coined what, you know, we as an organisation at SciWeb are all about, which is solutions. That's what our members go out and do, isn't it? They go out and deliver solutions. Going back to keeping 1.5 alive and things still being possible, you know, we do face a pretty stark future if we carry on business as usual. And, you know, the public get that now, and decision makers, I think, get that now. There is no credible alternative to taking action. We have to act and we have to make things possible. You know, the good news when you talk to a lot of the people who work in our sector and do that delivery is most of what we've got to do is actually being done somewhere. From renewables to water recycling to kind of passive house technology to circular economy stuff to agroforestry and nature-based solutions. All of this we can do. What we're not doing and what we need to do is to choose to do it at scale.
Yeah, and at pace.
And at pace. And I think that is down to politicians who are a bit scared of large-scale change and scared of short-term cost impacting, you know, their political term. They have to take the pain without being able to claim the gain. I think it was Craig Bennett who said in one of the previous episodes, you know, we don't yet know what we're capable of because we haven't really tried hard enough yet. But if you work on the basis that we do actually know how to do most of it in the ways that we currently understand how systems work, stuff works, we're going to discover an awful lot along the way and learn an awful lot along the way. And we're probably going to get an awful lot better at delivering some of these outcomes. Almost the more we try and do, the quicker we're going to learn. It's a big leap of faith. But again, just going back to that pandemic, if the public see the urgency and see that this is really necessary and beneficial, then they give the decision makers the mandate to be brave. And that's what we need on Planet Possible, isn't it?
That's a beautiful place to wrap up, I think, Al. Absolutely. A bit of bravery and some optimism. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I'm really looking forward to the next couple of seasons. We're thinking about season 3 and season 4, and they'll both be getting recorded fairly soon. So, Al, as ever, it's a pleasure to spend some time chatting to you about this kind of stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Remember, the podcast formerly known as Let's Talk Bwlb is now called Planet Possible. Everything else is the same. You don't need to change your subscription or anything like that. Just keep listening however and wherever you already listen and get the new name in your head. Season 3 is on its way, and while we build up to that, keep a lookout for more Planet Possible audio specials coming your way soon. I'm Niki Roach. That's it for now. Stay safe and see you next time.
Planet Possible is produced by Bwlb. Bwlb Bwlb. The best ideas, the strongest content.